Hi, my name is Jonathan Dye, and I will be presenting on the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus in the Iliad. My presentation will begin with a timeline and a brief explanation of what queer erasure is, followed by a discussion of the historical debate surrounding Achilles and Patroclus' relationship, and then the two opinions, whether they were just friends or more than friends, and if they were more than friends, was their relationship pederistic or conjugal. In the interest of time, I'll just briefly highlight a few things here. Patroclus was born before Achilles, although likely only by a few years, and because Patroclus accidentally killed a boy in his childhood, he was sent to basically grow up with Achilles. As we know, they joined the Trojan War, Achilles stopped fighting, Patroclus begged Achilles to rejoin the battle, and ended up wearing Achilles' armor instead to battle, and that led to him being killed by Hector. Patroclus' death triggered Achilles to slaughter countless Trojans, including Hector, and ultimately led to his own demise when Paris shot an arrow at him, which was guided by Apollo. In the end, the ashes of Achilles and Patroclus were buried together. I also want to make sure we're familiar with a few things before I begin. The term homosexual would have been an anachronism in Homer's time. The ancient Greeks did not feel the need to categorize their sexual life by the gender of their partners. As a society, they just did not do that. Instead, gender roles were of pivotal importance to the ancient Greeks. And pederasty was a practice which was common in ancient Greece, especially in Athens, in which an older man and a younger male had a relationship where the younger man was taught political, social, intellectual things as well as sexual things. There was a sexual aspect of the relationship. The eromenos was the adolescent boy who was the passive receptor in sex and was subordinate to the erastes, who was older, the active participant in sex, and also superior to the eromenos. Additionally, I want to talk a little bit about queer erasure, which is the removal of LGBTQ plus people from history, usually due to a cultural agenda of some sort, such as religion or the need to control people. We have to make sure that we're aware that LGBTQ people have existed since the beginning of the human race, and they really have only been removed from things like art and history because of homophobic attitudes that, by and large, began with European colonialism. As Roberts states, people quite often choose to reinterpret queer writing as platonic or a very close friendship, claiming there is a lack of evidence to support they were gay as they never explicitly said so. There are unfortunately many examples of this happening in society. For one of them is that pre-colonial Africa was a very queer-affirming place before colonialism, and now it's one of the most homophobic continents on the earth. Another example being that ancient Greece was notoriously homosexual. This is art discovered in Pompeii that was originally hidden from the public because the discoverers did not want them to know that homosexual practice was conducted in ancient Greece. Pirates were very queer. The Nazis, this image depicts them burning books and books, volumes of queer literature held at the Institute for Science of Sexuality. And an example that we're all probably familiar with is David and Jonathan in the Bible, who almost undoubtedly were queer. So the question becomes, is Achilles and Patroclus' relationship homosexual in nature? And this question has been debated since the Iliad was written, essentially. It is not a recent development, and writers throughout history, either in retellings of the stories or even in arguments that have been recorded, have debated one way or another. Xenophon is the largest proponent of the idea that Achilles and Patroclus were just friends. He lived around 300 years after Homer. And he said that Homer has made Achilles take that spectacular revenge for Patroclus because it was his companion that died, not his Paidakal, which is a synonym for eromenos. The best of the demigods are celebrated in song for having achieved their great and glorious deeds together, but not because they slept together, but because of their mutual esteem. These other writers, although they came many hundreds years later, basically all agreed with Xenophon's interpretation of the Iliad. However, Xenophon also dismissed Zeus and Ganymede's relationship as non-sexual in nature as well. The story, which is briefly mentioned in the Iliad, is that Zeus beheld Ganymede's beauty and took him to Olympus as his cupbearer and his lover, as depicted here. And it is very, very obviously a pederastic relationship, and Xenophon denied that. He said that Zeus was really attracted to Ganymede's brain and his intellect, but we know obviously now that it is a pederastic relationship. And as Clark says, a notion as absurd as this gives away Xenophon's bias. In contrast to Xenophon's view, many ancient writers held the opinion that Achilles and Patroclus had a pederastic relationship, such as Aeschylus, Plato, and Aeschines, who all lived around the same time as Xenophon as well. And it's interesting to note that they argued for different interpretations of who was the Erastes and who was the Eromenos in the relationship. Additionally, Apollonius Rhodius and Chariton, as well as a host of other later writers, supported the idea of a pederastic interpretation of their relationship. The problem is that Achilles and Patroclus don't really fit the mold for a pederastic relationship, because they were close in age. Patroclus was wiser than Achilles, and Achilles was much stronger than Patroclus. As you can see here, my child, Achilles is nobler than you with his immortal blood, but you are older. He has more power than you by far, but give him sound advice, guide him even in battle. And so recently, scholars, and who I agree with, have argued for a conjugal interpretation, a marriage-like interpretation of Achilles and Patroclus' relationship. This is because they're similar to Odysseus and Persephone in that they have a balanced relationship atypical for the ancient Greek time, and they substitute roles with each other and they confuse the hierarchies of the time. Additionally, Homer compares Achilles and Patroclus in the Iliad to Meleager and Cleopatra. And Achilles, when he's in mourning, is in the exact same position as Andromede when she's mourning Hector. We can see here that Achilles wishes that Briseis had been killed when he destroyed Lyrnessus, and he also wishes that all of the other Trojan and Argive warriors would die so that him and Patroclus alone could sack Troy. Apollo even criticizes Achilles' reaction to Patroclus' death, saying that it's unwarranted. Achilles' love for Patroclus far exceeds the social norm at the time when he says that it affects him more than his own father's death or his son's death would, which is not typical for two friends, but is typical, and we do see it with Hector and Andromache's relationship. And Achilles breaks social norms left and right in the Iliad, with his anger towards Agamemnon, the rage of Achilles, the decision of his fate, and his relationship with his mother, and we see it all the time that he breaks the social norms. As you can see, many modern and ancient scholars agree that Achilles and Patroclus were more than friends, and those who disagreed often showed ulterior motives. And it has really given me a vast appreciation for Homer's talent because he was so ahead of his time, not only in regards to homosexual relationships, but in a myriad of other things as well. And even though arguments against pederasty are valid, I think that there's strong evidence in the Iliad that there was a conjugal bond between the two. And so I personally believe that Achilles and Patroclus had a deep, loving, conjugal relationship that in the modern days would be defined as homosexual. As you could probably tell, there was a lot to unpack in this topic, and 9 minutes does not give it justice. So please go and check out these works cited. They are amazing, and I learned a lot from them. I went ahead and divided the pictures from the literature to help you find those. And I really hope that you can look into them and discover for yourself the nature of the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus.